Amos Tutuola's The Palm Wine Drinkard, 1952, is a pioneering work in African literature. As the first novel by a Nigerian writer published internationally in English, it stands out for its originality, blending Yoruba oral traditions, folklore, and myth with an imaginative prose style that defies Western literary conventions. The novel, subtitled, "And His Dead Palm Wine Tapster in the Dead's Town," follows the fantastical journey of an unnamed protagonist as he searches for his dead palm wine tapster in the land of the dead. Tutuola's work is significant not only for its narrative content but for how it challenged colonial literary norms and affirmed African storytelling as a legitimate and powerful art form. Plot overview. The story is narrated by a self-styled palm wine drinkard, a man from an affluent Yoruba family who is addicted to drinking palm wine. His life of pleasure is sustained by a skilled tapster, who climbs palm trees and produces large quantities of the alcoholic drink. When the tapster dies suddenly, the narrator's comfortable life unravels. Driven by grief and dependence, the drinkard resolves to find his tapster, even if it means journeying to Dead's Town, the mythical realm of the dead. His quest sets off a series of surreal adventures through magical towns and supernatural realms. Along the way, he is joined by a woman he marries, referred to only as my wife, and together they face a gauntlet of fantastic beings, spiritual trials, and metaphysical tests. These include the Skull, a grotesque creature who pretends to be a human suitor and abducts the wife, forcing the drinkard into a dramatic rescue. The Road of Snakes, a treacherous path he must navigate, filled with dangers. The Complete Gentleman, a dandy who borrows body parts from others to appear attractive, symbolizing deception and identity fluidity. The Hungry Creature's Town, a place where all citizens suffer from chronic hunger and must pay to be allowed to eat. The Invisible Pawn Town, a site of metaphysical debt and suffering, where he is held as a pawn for a small error. Eventually, the drinkard reaches Dead's Town, where he finds his tapster but is unable to bring him back to life. The journey, however, becomes transformative. He returns to his village a wiser man, having gained magical powers and spiritual insight. The story concludes with the drinkard using his newly acquired powers to help his community, becoming a figure of wisdom and authority. Analysis. 1. Myth, folklore, and oral tradition. At its core, the Palm Wine Drinkard is a literary reimagining of Yoruba oral tradition. Tutuola draws heavily on folktales, proverbs, chants, and storytelling structures, crafting a world shaped by spiritual logic rather than Western realism. In African oral narratives, the boundary between the natural and supernatural is fluid. Spirits, gods, humans, and animals coexist and interact. Tutuola preserves this worldview by populating the novel with bizarre creatures, enchanted towns, and metaphysical rules. His storytelling is cyclical and episodic, akin to a griot's performance, where each tale imparts moral or spiritual wisdom. The quest motif, so common in mythological traditions, structures the narrative. Like Odysseus or Dante, the drinkard embarks on a journey not just through space, but through symbolic realms of transformation and revelation. 2. Language and style. Broken English as literary resistance. One of the most distinctive features of the novel is its language. Tutuola writes in a deliberately unpolished form of English, often referred to as patois, or broken English. Critics initially ridiculed his style as primitive or unsophisticated, but later readers and scholars celebrated it as a radical literary strategy. Tutuola's English reflects the cadence and rhythm of Yoruba speech, preserving the flavor of oral storytelling. By refusing to conform to standard English grammar and syntax, he subverts colonial linguistic hierarchies and asserts African authenticity. This linguistic choice also serves as a metaphor. Just as the drinkard travels across surreal landscapes that defy logic, The language itself resists Western rationalism and linearity. 3. Symbolism and allegory. Despite its folkloric surface, the novel contains rich allegorical content. It can be read on multiple levels. Addiction and dependence. The Drinkard's journey is initially motivated by his dependency on palm wine. His addiction mirrors a broader critique of moral decay and selfish indulgence. His transformation reflects the process of recovery and growth through hardship. Death and the afterlife. The journey to Dead's Town allegorizes the confrontation with mortality, ancestral connection, and the cycle of life. In Yoruba cosmology, the dead are not absent. They remain present and influential, and Tutuola literalizes this through the journey to the land of the dead. Colonialism and dislocation. Though never explicitly political, the novel's surrealism can be interpreted as a metaphor for colonial disruption. The absurdity and arbitrariness of the magical towns reflect the chaotic reordering of African societies under colonial rule. Moral trials. Each episode functions like a fable, with moral or philosophical implications. The Complete Gentleman warns against vanity and illusion. The Hungry Creature's Town critiques greed and inequity. 4. The hero's journey and transformation. Initially, the protagonist is immature, lazy, and hedonistic, reliant on others for his pleasure and survival. But through trials and ordeals, he evolves into a responsible, community-oriented figure. This progression mirrors the archetypal hero's journey. Call to adventure. The death of the tapster. Initiation and trials. Encounters with magical beings and metaphysical spaces. Transformation. Gaining powers, knowledge, and self-awareness. Return. Coming back to the community to serve and lead. The novel ends with the protagonist no longer seeking pleasure, but offering spiritual service. This shift reflects African values of communal responsibility, elder wisdom, and societal integration. 5. Religion and cosmology. Tutuola's work is deeply informed by Yoruba cosmology, where gods, orishas, spirits, and ancestors shape the human world. The boundaries between physical and spiritual realms are porous. The novel is filled with supernatural logic. A man can vanish into the ground, talk to ghosts, or borrow body parts. These events may seem irrational to Western readers but are perfectly coherent within the spiritual framework Tutuola invokes. Through this lens, the palm wine Drinkard affirms an indigenous African worldview. One that values the unseen, the mystical, and the ancestral. It also challenges rationalism and materialism, offering an alternative epistemology grounded in myth. 6. Critique of Western modernity and civilization. Although fantastical, the novel subtly critiques Western modernity. The various towns and characters the Drinkard encounters represent distorted societies plagued by hunger, greed, debt, and moral confusion. Problems that resonate with modern African realities under colonialism and early independence. The Invisible Pawn Town, where people are held hostage for minor infractions, reflects the absurdity and cruelty of bureaucratic or colonial justice systems. The Hungry Creature's Town exposes the injustices of a society where food is commodified and suffering normalized. By embedding these critiques in folklore, Tutuola sidesteps direct political commentary but achieves a subversive moral resonance. 7. Reception and legacy. The palm wine Drinkard received mixed reviews upon its release. Some Western critics exoticized it as a quaint native tale, while others dismissed it for its primitive language. However, writers like Dylan Thomas praised it as young English literature at its most vigorous. Later generations of African writers and scholars recognized Tutuola as a trailblazer, someone who dared to write outside the European mold. His influence can be seen in Ben Okri, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, and others who combine myth, politics, and nonlinear storytelling. The novel is now regarded as a landmark in African literature, valued for its innovation, cultural fidelity, and imaginative power. Conclusion: The Palm Wine Drinkard is more than a novel. It is a cultural declaration, a celebration of African oral heritage, and a challenge to colonial literary norms. Amos Tutuola's fusion of folklore, surrealism, and unconventional English gives voice to a distinctly African narrative tradition that refuses to be domesticated by Western expectations. Through the fantastical adventures of the Palm Wine Drinkard, Tutuola explores timeless themes: the quest for identity, the seduction of pleasure, the wisdom gained through suffering, and the ultimate return to community. The novel's mythic depth, linguistic daring, and spiritual richness continue to inspire readers and writers across the globe. In affirming African myth as a source of literary power, the Palm Wine Drinkard paved the way for a new kind of African storytelling, bold, visionary, and unapologetically rooted in its own soil.